I walked directly towards them. And what I did that afternoon turned their confident smiles into pure despair. My name is Anthony. I'm 71 years old. And until that moment, I'd simply been a widowed father who believed he had raised decent sons. For 45 years of the marriage to my beloved wife, Rose, I sacrificed everything for my family. I worked double shifts at the textile mill, missed birthdays, vacations, and countless nights of sleep, all so that Edward and George could have a better life than mine. When Rose passed away 3 months ago, I thought I would at least have my son's support in my old age. How naive I was. My routine had been the same for decades. I'd wake up at 5:30 in the morning, brew coffee in the old coffee maker Rose gave me for our 10th anniversary, and review the bills that always arrived promptly. I lived on $150 a week from my pension, an amount barely enough for my medications, basic food, and household utilities. But I never complained. I'd learned to live with little, to stretch every dollar as if it were rubber. The house I lived in was the same one Rose and I had bought when Edward was 5 and George was just 3. It was a simple, 2-story build with cream-colored walls that desperately needed a fresh coat of paint, a small front yard where Rose cultivated her red roses, and a backyard where the boys used to play football until dusk. In the living room, on a worn wooden table, I kept our family photographs, our wedding, the children's first steps, graduations, Christmases, memories of when we were happy. After Rose's funeral, Edward and George started visiting me more frequently. At first, I thought it was genuine filial concern. "Dad, you can't keep living here alone," they'd say. "This house is too big for you." Angela, always with her perfect smile and elegant emerald green dresses, would nod and add, "You should consider a retirement home. There are lovely places where you'd be better cared for." But I resisted. This house was all I had left of Rose. Every corner held her essence. The bedroom where we had shared thousands of nights. The kitchen, where she prepared my favorite meals. Even the bathroom where I kept her perfume that I still hadn't dared to throw away. I couldn't abandon these memories for someone else's convenience. That morning, like every Friday, I had walked the 6 blocks to the neighborhood bank. It was my weekly ritual. Withdraw my $150, buy fresh bread at Miguel's bakery, some vegetables at the market, and return home before noon. The teller, a young man named Carlos, who knew me by now, always greeted me with respect. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson. Your pension is ready." It was one of the few moments of the week where I felt like a normal person, not a burden. Upon returning home, I noticed the metal gate was ajar. That was strange, because I always kept it locked. Edward and George were in the backyard, along with Angela. They were speaking in whispers, but their voices reached me with a clarity that chilled my blood. "This poison should have worked by now," George said with obvious irritation. "It's been 2 weeks, and the old man is still going strong." Edward replied, "Mom left us all these hospital debts, funeral expenses, and he's still here spending what little is left of the inheritance." Angela, with that sweet voice she always used with me, added something that broke my heart. "If it doesn't work tonight, we'll have to be more direct. We can't keep waiting. The house is worth a lot of money, and we need to sell it soon." George nodded. "You're right. I already spoke with the real estate agent. He says we can get at least $200,000 for this property." My knees almost buckled. It wasn't just that they wanted to kill me. They had already calculated everything. My death was simply an obstacle in their business plan. The house where I had raised my children, where I had loved my wife, where I had 40 years of memories, was just a dollar figure to them. But instead of collapsing, something inside me hardened, like the steel I used to work with at the factory. a cold, calculating rage I had never felt before. I took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of my old leather briefcase, and walked directly towards them with the determination of a man who has nothing left to lose. "Good afternoon," I said, with a calm I didn't recognize in myself. The three of them turned towards me as if they had seen a ghost. George turned pale. Edward began to stammer something incoherent, and Angela looked at me with those eyes I now saw for what they truly were, cold and calculating. "Dad," Edward mumbled, "we didn't hear you come in." "Evidently," I replied, keeping my voice serene while my heart pounded like a war drum. "What were you talking about?" I asked, though I already knew every poisonous word they had uttered. George exchanged a nervous glance with his brother before answering. "Nothing important, Dad, and just family stuff." Angela, regaining her composure, added with that fake smile that now disgusted me, "We were just worried about you, father-in-law. You've been very down lately." The hypocrisy of their words burned within me. There they were, planning my death, and they had the audacity to feign concern. But I decided to play along. If they wanted to act, so could I. "How thoughtful," I said, sitting in the old garden chair where Rose used to sunbathe in the afternoons. "Tell me, what kind of concern exactly?" Edward cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, Dad, it's just that living here alone isn't healthy for you. Ever since Mom died, you've been deteriorating." The word hit me like a slap. Deteriorating. That's how they saw me, as a broken object that needed to be discarded. "Deteriorating?" I repeated slowly, savoring the cruelty of the word. "Interesting choice of term, Edward." George quickly intervened. "What Edward means is that we're worried about your well-being. This house is too big, too expensive to maintain. Perhaps it would be better if you considered moving to a place more appropriate for your age." Angela nodded vigorously, and for the first time, I noticed how predatory she looked when she thought she had the upper hand. There are excellent senior living communities in the city, places where you'd have companionship, medical care, activities. You'd be much happier. Her words dripped with false compassion, but her eyes glittered with the greed of someone who had already counted the money from my death. I leaned back in the chair and watched them in silence for a long moment. It was fascinating to see how guilt and anxiety played across their faces. George constantly ran his hand through his hair. Edward couldn't maintain eye contact, and Angela clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. "Do you know what the most painful thing about all of this is?" I finally asked them. The three of them tensed, awaiting my answer. "It's not knowing that you want to kill me. It's realizing that you never truly cared about me." The words came out with a calmness that surprised even myself. Edward opened his mouth to protest, but I stopped him with a gesture. "Don't insult me with denials. I heard you clearly. Poison, right? In my food, in my medication. I must commend you on your creativity." The blood drained completely from their faces. George was the first to try to save himself. "Dad, it's not what you think. That we were talking about the rats in the basement." "Yes, that's it. We bought rat poison, and it hasn't worked." The lie was so pathetic, it almost made me laugh. "Rats," I repeated with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The rats are named Anthony now. The rats leave inheritances of $200,000. The silence that followed was deafening. They were completely exposed. Angela attempted one last resort of manipulation. "Father-in-law, I think you're confused. At your age, it's normal for the mind to play tricks. Perhaps you misheard." But her voice trembled at the end, betraying her desperation. I stood up slowly, feeling for the first time in months a strength I thought was lost. My mind is perfectly clear, Angela. So clear that I can see exactly who you three are. I walked towards the house, stopping at the door. And you know what's most ironic about all of this? They turned towards me, hanging on my words like condemned souls awaiting sentence. That you're so desperate for my money that you never bothered to find out how much I actually have. Their expressions of confusion gave me a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. That night, when they finally left with clumsy excuses and promises to talk later, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of hot tea in my trembling hands. For the first time since Rose's funeral, I didn't feel completely alone. I had something to live for, to show them they had gravely underestimated the old man they wanted to eliminate. I went to my bedroom and opened the old wardrobe where Rose kept her elegant dresses. At the bottom, behind a shoebox I hadn't touched in years, was the yellow envelope I had received a week after the funeral. I had stored it there unopened, too consumed by grief to process more legal papers. But now, with my hands still shaking from the betrayal I had uncovered, I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a letter from the lawyer of my Uncle Arthur, my father's older brother, who had died childless in Buenos Aires 2 months ago. The letter explained that as his only living relative, I had inherited his estate, a 500-acre ranch outside Buenos Aires, plus bank accounts totaling nearly $500,000. I sat on the edge of the bed, reading and rereading those incredible figures. $500,000. A fortune my children didn't know existed, while they planned to kill me for a house worth $200,000. The irony was so brutal, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That dawn, while my would-be murderers slept peacefully in their beds, I stayed awake planning something I had never imagined doing: my revenge. It wouldn't be noisy or violent, like they had planned for me. It would be silent, meticulous, and absolutely devastating. For the first time in 3 months, I genuinely smiled. My dear children had awakened something in me they believed was dead, but they were very wrong. Anthony hadn't died with Rose. He had only been sleeping, and now, finally, he had awakened. The following days were the strangest of my life. My children began to visit me with suspicious frequency, always with forced smiles and a kindness that turned my stomach. Edward appeared every morning with fresh bread and coffee, pretending to be the devoted son he never was. George arrived in the afternoons with flowers to brighten the house, as if Rose's withered roses could be replaced by his cheap guilt. And Angela, that viper dressed in perfect attire, brought homemade stews that smelled delicious, but which I dared not taste. "Dad, you have to eat more," Edward would tell me as he placed a steaming plate in front of me. "You're too thin." His eyes shone with a fake concern that nauseated me. "Thanks, son," I would reply with the best performance of my life. "But you know my appetite hasn't been the same since your mother died." It was true, but not for the reasons he believed. Every bite I pretended to swallow under his watchful eye was torture. I moved the food around the plate, mashed it with my fork, put small portions in my mouth, and held them in my cheeks like a hamster, then discreetly spit them into napkins I kept in my pockets. At night, when they left, I threw away all the food they had brought and ate only toast and fruit I bought myself at the market. Paranoia had taken hold of me, but it wasn't irrational paranoia. It was pure survival. I checked every medication before taking it, smelled every drink, distrusted even tap water. I started buying sealed water bottles and hid them in my bedroom, along with crackers and canned goods that no one else touched. But while they believed they were slowly poisoning me, I had begun my own investigation. I called my Uncle Arthur's lawyer, an older man named Ricardo Montenegro, who had offices in New York but also legal representation in Texas. His voice on the phone was professional, but warm when I explained my situation. "Mr. Dawson," he said with an accent that reassured me, "I understand your surprise. Your Uncle Arthur was very clear in his will. You are the sole heir to all his assets. The property is valued at approximately $2 million, and the bank accounts total another $500,000. But there's something else you need to know." My heart stopped. "What is it?" "Your uncle also left specific instructions. He knew you had family in America, children, and he feared they might try to take advantage of the inheritance. That's why he established a very particular trust. The money can only be released gradually, and only if you demonstrate that you are being well treated by your family, or if you present evidence to the contrary." The irony struck me like lightning. My uncle, a man I barely remembered from my childhood, had predicted exactly what was happening. "What kind of evidence?" I asked with a trembling voice. "Photographs, recordings, testimonies, medical reports that demonstrate negligence or mistreatment. Your Uncle Arthur was very specific. If your heirs try to harm you for money, you have the right to use that inheritance to protect yourself and obtain justice." That conversation changed everything. I wasn't just an old man waiting for death. I was someone with resources, and more importantly, with a purpose. I began to plan meticulously. I bought a small digital recorder at the electronics store downtown, paying in cash to leave no trace. I learned how to use it by watching videos on the public library computer, where I went every Tuesday under the pretense of reading newspapers. I also contacted Rebecca Sterling, a local attorney who had handled some minor legal matters for Rose and me in the past. She was a woman in her 50s, intelligent and direct, who had always treated me with genuine respect. When I explained my situation, her expression changed from professional to deeply indignant. "Mr. Dawson," she told me, clenching her fists, "what you're telling me is attempted murder. We could call the police right now." But I stopped her with a gesture. "I don't want them to go to prison," I told her, surprising myself with that truth. "They're my children, Rebecca. I just want them to understand what they've done, to feel even a fraction of the pain they've caused me." She looked at me with a mixture of compassion and admiration. "Then we'll do this your way," she finally told me. "But we need solid evidence, and we need a plan that will expose them without completely destroying your family." Over the next 2 weeks, my life became a macabre play. In the mornings, I played the role of the sick, vulnerable father they expected to see. I feigned weakness, occasional confusion, even small episodes of disorientation that reassured them and made them believe their poison was working. "Are you feeling all right, Dad?" George would ask when I pretended to get dizzy while walking through the living room. "Perhaps you should lie down for a bit." His voice reeked of fake concern that made me want to vomit. But I would nod weakly and lie down on the sofa, closing my eyes, while he and Angela exchanged satisfied glances. But in the afternoons, when they left, I transformed into a private detective. I recorded every suspicious conversation, documented every visit, every plate of food they brought, every question about my will or my finances. The recorder had become my best friend, capturing every incriminating word they uttered when they thought I couldn't hear them. One afternoon, pretending to be asleep in my chair, I overheard the most revealing conversation yet. Edward was on the phone with someone, probably the real estate agent they had mentioned earlier. "Yes, the house will be available very soon," he said with a cruelty that chilled my blood. "My father is, let's say, his health is declining rapidly. It will probably be A matter of weeks, a month at most. There was a pause while the other person spoke. 250,000. Perfect. Keep it reserved for us. Angela, who was washing the dishes I had pretended to use, added without turning around, "We should start packing his things. There's a lot of sentimental junk we could throw away before putting the house up for sale." She was referring to Rose's photographs, our memories, 40 years of shared life, as if they were refuse. George nodded from his position by the window. "I already spoke with the funeral home. They'll have everything ready when the time comes. Simple cremation, nothing elaborate. With what we spent on Mom's funeral, we can't afford another spectacle." The word spectacle broke my heart. That's how they saw their mother's death, as an unnecessary expense. And that's how they would see mine too, as an annoying formality before collecting their prize. But the conversation that truly sealed their fate came 2 days later. I was in my bedroom, supposedly resting, when I heard them in the kitchen discussing the final details of my murder. "The arsenic isn't working fast enough," Angela said with clinical frustration. "I've been putting it in his food for 3 weeks, and he barely looks a little weaker." My blood turned to ice. Arsenic. They were using arsenic. Edward replied, "Maybe we need to increase the dose or change the method." His voice was as casual as if they were discussing the weather. "No," George interjected. "It's too risky. If someone does an autopsy and finds high levels of arsenic, they could suspect." He had thought of everything. The scoundrel. Angela sighed audibly. "So, what do you suggest? We can't wait forever. The hospital debts keep piling up, and we need that money from the house." "There are other ways now," Edward said with a coldness I had never heard in my son's voice. "An accident? The stairs are steep. He's weak. A fall could look very natural." I lay paralyzed in my bed, recording every word as they planned to turn the stairs where I had carried my children when they were small into the instrument of my death. That night, when they finally left, I sat in the kitchen with all the recordings, the photographs I had discreetly taken, and my inheritance documents. It was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. And they had no idea what was coming. The call that would change everything came on a gray Tuesday morning. Rebecca contacted me with news that made my revenge plan take on a dimension I hadn't even imagined. "Mr. Dawson," she said with controlled emotion in her voice, "you need to come to my office immediately. I have information about your children that will change everything." I arrived at her office an hour later, walking slowly to maintain my act of a sick man. Rebecca greeted me with an expression that mixed indignation and determination. On her desk were several scattered documents and an open laptop. "Mr. Dawson, what I'm about to show you will hurt, but you need to know," she began by pointing to the screen. After our last conversation, I decided to investigate Edward and George's finances a little more deeply, and what I found is disturbing. I sat across from her, mentally preparing myself for what was to come. "What did you discover?" Rebecca turned the screen towards me. "Edward has gambling debts of over $100,000. He owes money to lenders who are not exactly known for their patience. George, for his part, invested the family savings in a fraudulent business and lost everything. They are financially desperate, Mr. Dawson. It's not just greed. They're on the verge of ruin." The figures on the screen danced before my eyes. $100,000 in gambling debts. It all explained so much. The constant visits, the urgency in their voices, the poorly disguised desperation. They weren't just greedy children. They were drowning men who saw my death as their only salvation. "There's more," Rebecca continued, switching to another screen. Angela has been contacting real estate agents for the past 6 weeks, not just to sell their house, but also to appraise this property. She's even applied for loans using the house as collateral, assuming it will soon be hers. The betrayal deepened with each revelation. How did you get all of this information? Rebecca smiled with an expression I hadn't seen before, almost predatory. I have contacts in banks, gambling houses, real estate offices. When I told some colleagues what was happening, everyone wanted to help. No one tolerates elder abuse. Mr. Dawson, you have more allies than you imagine. I leaned back in the chair, processing the magnitude of what I had just learned. My children didn't just want to kill me. They had already mentally spent my money. They had already planned every detail of their lives after my death. It was as if I were already a ghost to them. What do you suggest we do with this information? I asked, though I already had some ideas of my own. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes shining with determination. We're going to use your inheritance in a way that your Uncle Arthur would have completely approved of. We're going to buy their debts. The simplicity and brilliance of the plan left me breathless. Buy their debts? Exactly. Edward's gambling debts, George's failed investments, even the loans Angela has applied for. Everything has a price, and there's always someone willing to sell. When you own their debts, you'll have complete control over their lives. The irony was perfect. While they planned to inherit my money, I would use my true inheritance to become their creditor. How much would it cost? Rebecca consulted her notes. Edward's debts could be bought for about $75,000. The lenders would be happy to recover that amount and transfer the problem to someone else. George's investments are more complicated, but for about $50,000, we could acquire the contracts and remaining obligations. She paused, calculating. In total, less than $150,000 to have absolute financial control over their lives. It was less than a third of my liquid inheritance. Do it, I told her, without excitement. The following days were a whirlwind of legal and financial activity. Rebecca worked with an efficiency that impressed me. Contacting lenders, buying debt contracts, establishing shell corporations to hide my identity in the transactions. Meanwhile, I continued my act at home, pretending to gradually deteriorate under the watchful eyes of my would-be murderers. Edward arrived each morning more nervous than the last. How are you feeling today, Dad? He would ask with an anxiety I now fully understood. It wasn't concern for my well-being. It was desperation to hasten my death. His creditors were pressing, and every day I remained alive was a day closer to consequences that probably included physical violence. I feel very weak, son, I would reply with a trembling voice. Last night, I barely slept. His eyes would light up with a macabre hope every time I feigned new symptoms. George had started bringing medications that, according to him, would help me with various ailments. This is for blood pressure, Dad, he would say. Handing me pills, I pretended to swallow, but then spit out, and this to help you sleep better. Everything he brought went directly to the analysis Rebecca had arranged with a private lab. Arsenic, sedatives, even small amounts of anticoagulants. They were trying different murder methods like perverse scientists. Angela had become especially solicitous, appearing with elaborate meals that smelled delicious, but concealed lethal cocktails. My dear father-in-law, she would say with that saccharine voice that now turned my stomach, I brought you your favorite chicken soup. But the lab tests revealed that her favorite soup contained enough poison to kill a horse. The most satisfying phase of the plan began exactly 2 weeks after my meeting with Rebecca. She called me that morning with news that made me smile for the first time in months. Mr. Dawson, we are officially Your son's new creditors. Edward owes us $75,000, George $52,000, and Angela has outstanding loans for $30,000. Legally, we can demand immediate payment or enforce the collateral they've put up. What kind of collateral? Edward's house, George's car, and Angela used her sewing business as collateral for several small loans. In a total, we can completely ruin them if they don't pay. Her voice had a professional satisfaction that was contagious. Perfect, I said. But I don't want to ruin them yet. I want them to feel the pressure gradually, just as they've been gradually killing me. Over the next week, my children began to receive calls from their new creditors. Polite but firm calls, reminding them of their financial obligations. Edward responded with nervous promises to pay soon. George tried to negotiate extensions, and Angela simply hung up the phone with increasing desperation. But what I really enjoyed was watching them interact with me during this period. Their acting became even more exaggerated, more desperate. Edward brought me flowers every day. George insisted on helping me with tasks I could perfectly well do alone, and Angela practically begged me to eat her poisoned meals. Dad, should you really eat more? Edward would plead as I pretended to pick at a stew that tasted of metal and chemicals. You need to keep your strength up. The irony of his words provoked an internal laugh I had to contain with all my might. One afternoon, while feigning a nap, I heard them in the backyard discussing their deteriorating financial situation. I don't understand what's happening, George said with obvious panic in his voice. Yesterday, 3 different creditors called me. They all want full payment immediately. Edward sounded equally desperate. Me too. And they're not the original lenders. Someone bought my debts. And now they're pressuring differently, more professionally. Angela, always the most practical of the group, got straight to the point. Then we need to speed up the plan. We can't wait for the poison to work slowly anymore. We need that house money now, this week. Her words confirmed what I already knew. My death had become their only hope for financial survival. But what they didn't know was that their survival was completely in my hands. I was the invisible puppet master, controlling every aspect of their lives, and they were the puppets dancing towards their own destruction. That night, I called Rebecca to coordinate the next phase of the plan. It's time to partially reveal our hand, I told her. I want them to know they have a new creditor, but I still don't want them to know who I am. Are you sure, Mr. Dawson? Once we start this phase, there will be no turning back. I looked at Rose's photographs on the nightstand. I remembered 45 years of happy marriage. I thought about how these 3 had defiled her memory. By planning my death, and my resolve hardened like tempered steel. I am completely sure, Rebecca. It's time for my dear children to know real fear. The first letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a messenger who rang the doorbell exactly at 9. Edward was with me at breakfast, feigning concern as he watched me drink the coffee he had specially prepared for me. When the messenger asked for Edward Brooks, I saw the blood drain from his face. A certified letter, he mumbled as he signed for it. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. I pretended to be absorbed in my toast, but I watched every micro-expression on his face as he read. His eyes widened, his breathing quickened, and for a moment I thought he would faint. "Bad news, son?" I asked with the most innocent voice I could muster. Edward quickly folded the letter, but not before I could see the letterhead. Integrated Financial Solutions, LLC, the shell company Rebecca had created to handle the debt purchases. "It's nothing important, Dad. Just work stuff." But his eyes told another story. That letter informed him that all his gambling debts had been transferred to a new financial entity, and that full payment was expected in 30 days, $75,000 in 1 month. or he would face legal consequences, including the seizure of all his assets. George received his letter an hour later. He was mowing the front lawn when another messenger arrived. I watched him open the letter in the yard, read its contents, and then sit heavily on the front steps as if his legs had stopped working. $52,000 in 30 days. Angela was the last to receive her surprise that same afternoon. When the third messenger rang the doorbell, she was in the kitchen preparing another of her poisoned meals. I watched her open the letter, read it once, then again, and finally crumpled the paper with such force that her knuckles turned white. $30,000, also in 30 days. That night, after I pretended to retire early to my room, I sat by the door with my faithful recorder, capturing the emergency meeting I knew they would have. Their voices reached me with crystal clarity through the thin walls of the house. "How is it possible that all three debts were sold at the same time?" Angela asked, with poorly contained hysteria. "This can't be a coincidence." Edward sounded like a man on the verge of a mental breakdown. "Someone is playing with us, but who? Who would have that much money to buy all our debts, and why would they do it?" George, always the most pragmatic of the group, got straight to the point. "It doesn't matter who it is. What matters is that we need $157,000 in less than a month, or we lose everything." He paused significantly. "The house is worth $250,000. It's our only way out." "But Dad is still alive," Angela whispered, as if uttering those words were a crime in itself. "And every day that passes, these new creditors seem more professional, more dangerous." Edward let out a bitter laugh. "More dangerous than losing our homes? More dangerous than having to explain to illegal lenders why we can't pay? Angela, if we don't get that money, we'll be living on the street before Christmas." The next 2 weeks were a fascinating spectacle of human deterioration. My three would-be murderers began to unravel in ways I had never imagined. Edward developed a nervous tic in his left eye that intensified every time the phone rang. George started drinking, something he had never done in excess, and now I could smell the alcohol on his breath from the morning. Angela became frantic, obsessively cleaning the house as if external order could control the internal chaos of their lives. But the most satisfying thing was to see how their treatment of me intensified to grotesque levels. Edward brought me breakfast in bed every morning, with smiles so forced they looked like masks of terror. "How did you sleep, dearest Dad?" he would ask with a sweetness that sent shivers down my spine. George had started offering to do everything. Wash my clothes, clean my room, even trim my nails. "Let me help you with that, Dad," he would insist with a desperation that bordered on pathetic. "I don't want you to hurt yourself." Angela had become a nightmare nurse, appearing at all hours with medications, vitamins, and those poisoned meals she prepared with a homicidal love that turned my stomach. "Father-in-law, you have to eat more," she would beg me while offering me spoonfuls of soup that tasted like liquid death. "You're losing weight." It was true that I had lost weight, but not because of their poisons, but because of the stress of maintaining this act and the difficulty of eating only when I was sure the food was not contaminated. Ironically, they interpreted my weight loss as evidence of the success of their murder plan. One night, feigning a deep sleep, I overheard the conversation that would confirm the final phase of my revenge. They were in the kitchen, and their voices had a desperate quality I hadn't heard before. "He's not dying fast enough," Angela said with a clinical frustration that chilled my blood. "I've tripled the dose of arsenic in his meals, and although he's weaker, he could last another 2 months like this." Edward replied with a voice I didn't recognize as my son's. 2 months is too long. The new creditors have started sending visitors. Men who don't say much but make their intentions very clear. George sounded drunk, but lucid in his desperation. Then we need to be more direct. An accident, the stairs, as we discussed, or maybe something in the bathroom. The floors are slippery. He's weak. What if someone suspects? Angela asked. Who's going to suspect? Edward retorted with a cruelty that broke my heart. He's a sick old man living alone. Accidents happen all the time, and we'll be the heartbroken children claiming illegitimate inheritance to overcome our grief. The conversation continued for another hour, detailing exactly how they planned to murder me in the coming days. They discussed schedules, methods, even rehearsed the emergency calls they would make after finding my body. Everything was recorded on my small device, every incriminating word preserved for posterity. But it was Angela's final sentence that completely sealed their fate. At least, when this is over, we'll never have to pretend to love him again. It'll be a relief to be free of this pathetic old man. Those words resonated in my mind all night. Pathetic old man. That's how they saw me after a lifetime sacrificing for them. After working double shifts to give them an education. After unconditionally loving 2 children who now planned to kill me with the same casual coldness they would discuss a dinner menu. The next morning, I called Rebecca with a decision that would change everything forever. Rebecca, I said, with a calm that surprised me. It's time for the final phase. I want you to organize a family meeting for this Friday afternoon. Tell them it's about the will, that I've decided to make some important changes before my health worsens further. Are you sure you want to do it this way, Mr. Dawson? I looked at Rose's photographs, thought of 45 years of true marriage. I remembered the words, pathetic old man, and I felt my heart harden completely. Completely sure, Rebecca. It's time for my dear children to discover exactly who they've been messing with. And I want it to be public. Very public. As I hung up the phone, I could hear Edward downstairs, probably adding another dose of arsenic to my morning coffee. But this time, for the first time in weeks, I genuinely smiled. Very soon, he would discover that he had been poisoning the man who completely controlled his future. The irony was so perfect, I could almost taste it. Friday arrived with a light rain that seemed to foreshadow the storm about to break. Rebecca had organized everything meticulously. The meeting would be at the public notary's office, a formal setting that would give legal weight to what was about to happen. But what my children didn't know was that I had also invited some special observers, a retired police officer who worked as a private investigator, a local journalist specializing in family fraud cases, and, of course, representatives of the true original creditors who had been looking for Edward and George for months. Dad, are you sure you feel well enough to go out? Edward asked me that morning while pretending to help me get dressed. His eyes shone with an emotion I now recognized as greed, disguised as filial concern. We could postpone the meeting until you feel better. No, son, I replied with a weak but firm voice. I feel my time is running out. I need to settle my affairs while I can still think clearly. It wasn't a complete lie. My time as a silent victim was definitely running out. George appeared shortly after, visibly nervous, but trying to maintain his composure. What exactly do you want to talk about, Dad? Is there anything specific about your will that worries you? His voice trembled slightly when he mentioned the word will. Several things, I replied mysteriously. I've been thinking a lot about family, about the legacy I want to leave, about who truly deserves. I watched them exchange anxious glances. But I prefer to discuss everything at the notary's office, where everything will be officially recorded. Angela arrived an hour before the appointment, wearing an elegant red dress she had probably bought specifically for this occasion. Her smile was radiant, as if it were a celebration instead of what she believed would be the formalization of my impending death. "Dearest father-in-law," she said, kissing my cheek with such fake affection that it nauseated me, "I'm so glad you decided to put your affairs in order. It's very responsible of you." Her eyes were already calculating numbers, mentally dividing an inheritance that didn't exist. The drive to the notary's office was surreal. All four of us were in Edward's car, and the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. They tried to make casual conversation, but their voices sounded forced, artificial. I remained silent, occasionally coughing weakly to reinforce my image as a dying man. "How long do you think this will take?" George asked, clearly anxious to reach the moment when he would learn the exact amount of his inheritance. "As long as it takes," I replied enigmatically. "I have many things to say, many revelations to share." When we arrived at the notary's office, I was surprised to see how many people were in the waiting room. Rebecca had done an excellent job. I recognized the private investigator by his military bearing, the journalist by his visible digital recorder, and the two men in suits, who were obviously the representatives of the original creditors. My children noticed the crowd too, but they assumed it was normal for a notary's office on a Friday afternoon. "Good afternoon, Mr. Dawson." The notary, an older man named Theodore, greeted me. He had been fully briefed on the situation. "Are you ready to proceed with the modification of your will?" "Completely ready," I replied, and for the first time in months, my voice sounded strong and clear. My children settled into their chairs, Edward and George flanking me, Angela sitting directly opposite me with an expectant smile. The notary, Theodore, opened a thick folder and began to read. "We are here today to discuss the testamentary matters of Mr. Anthony Dawson, 71 years of age." He paused dramatically. "But before proceeding with any modification, I understand there are certain urgent financial matters that require immediate attention." My children tensed. Edward was the first to speak. "Financial matters? I don't understand." Rebecca stood up from the back of the room, and I could see my children's eyes widen as they recognized her. "Allow me to explain," she said, with a professional voice that cut the air like a sword. "I am Rebecca Sterling, attorney for Integrated Financial Solutions, LLC. I believe you have recently received correspondence from us." The color drained completely from their faces. George began to stammer. You are..." "I am the legal representative of the company that bought all your debts," Rebecca continued relentlessly. "Edward, you owe us $75,000, George $52,000, and Angela $30,000. Each figure fell on them like a bomb. "But that's impossible," Angela protested, her voice rising an octave. "How can they have bought debts from 3 different people? Who has that kind of money?" Rebecca smiled, and it was a smile that filled me with pride. "Excellent question, Ms. Brooks. The answer is sitting right in front of you." All eyes turned to me, and for the first time in months, I let my true personality shine through the mask of illness I had been wearing. I straightened in my chair. My voice became clear and strong, and I looked directly into the eyes of each of my murderous children. "Surprise," I said, with a calm that contrasted dramatically with their expressions of growing horror. Edward was the first to find his voice. "Dad, what's going on? I don't understand." "Oh, I think you understand perfectly, son. I replied, savoring every word. You understand that you've been trying to kill me for the past 6 weeks? You understand that you've been poisoning my food with arsenic? You understand that you've been planning to make me have an accident on the stairs of my own house? The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Their faces went through a full spectrum of emotions: shock, denial, terror, and finally a horrible understanding that they had been completely discovered. George attempted a weak denial. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. I never what, George? I interrupted, pointing to the recorder Rebecca had placed on the notary's table. Never said we needed to be more direct? Never discussed with your brother the best way to simulate a fatal accident? Never called a funeral home to prearrange my cremation? His eyes fixed on the recorder, as if it were a venomous snake. This is a trap, he mumbled. No, George, I said, slowly rising from my chair, feeling a strength I hadn't experienced in years. This is justice. Rebecca opened another folder and began to distribute documents. For your information, gentlemen and madam, I have here copies of all financial transactions, audio recordings of your incriminating conversations, laboratory analyses of the meals you prepared for Mr. Dawson, and testimonies from multiple witnesses about your suspicious behavior. Angela finally exploded. This is ridiculous. You're a sick old man who's losing his mind. No one's going to believe these absurd accusations. I approached her slowly, and I could see her shrink in her chair as I drew near. Sick, Angela? Losing my mind? I pulled a small vial full of pills from my pocket. Are you referring to these vitamins you brought me yesterday? The same ones that contain enough arsenic to kill a horse, according to the lab analysis? I threw the vial onto the table, where it landed with a sound that echoed through the room. Or perhaps you're referring to the delicious chicken soup you prepared the day before yesterday, the one that contained anticoagulants that would have caused me to bleed internally? Edward tried to stand up, but the private investigator, a burly man named Brooks, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. I think it would be better if you remained seated, Mr. Dawson, he said, in a voice that brooked no argument. You see, I continued, savoring every second of their growing terror, while you thought you were slowly killing me, I was documenting every one of your crimes, every conversation, every poisoned meal, every homicidal plan you discussed, thinking I was too sick to hear. Rebecca intervened again. And now, thanks to the inheritance Mr. Dawson received from his Uncle Arthur, an inheritance you knew nothing about, he is officially the owner of all your debts and has the legal power to completely ruin your lives. The word inheritance hit them like a collective slap. Inheritance? Edward whispered. What inheritance? I smiled, and it was the most genuine smile I'd had in years. $500,000 in cash, Edward, plus a property in Argentina valued at $2 million. All perfectly legal, all completely mine, and all absolutely out of your reach, Jim. George was the first to completely collapse. He slumped in his chair as if someone had cut the strings that held him upright, and began to sob in a way that would have been pathetic if he hadn't been planning my death just days before. $500,000, he repeated through tears. All this time. Edward tried to maintain some vestige of dignity, but his voice trembled uncontrollably when he spoke. Dad, if you had that much money, why didn't you tell us? We could have solved our problems without what, Edward? I interrupted him with a coldness that surprised even myself. Without trying to murder me? Without poisoning my food for 6 weeks? Without planning to push me down the stairs? I leaned towards him until our renties were inches apart. Do you really think that after all you've done, you still deserve explanations? Angela had remained silent, but now she erupted with a fury that revealed her true nature. This is ridiculous. You're a manipulative, vengeful old man. You set us up from the beginning. Rebecca approached her with an expression that could have frozen hell. Miss Brooks, allow me to clarify something fundamental here. No one set you up. You freely chose to try to murder an elderly man for money. Mr. Dawson simply documented your crimes and took steps to protect himself. The journalist, who had been silently recording from the back of the room, approached with his camera. Mr. Dawson, could you tell us how you felt when you discovered that your own children were trying to kill you? For the first time in months, I didn't have to act. The emotions that surged were completely genuine. Pain, betrayal, disappointment, but also a strange sense of liberation. Imagine for a moment, I told the journalist, looking directly at my children, that you dedicate your entire life to raising and loving two people. Imagine that you sacrifice everything: time, money, dreams, opportunities, to give them the best possible life. And then imagine discovering that those same people see you only as a financial obstacle that must be eliminated. Edward tried to interrupt. Dad, we never wanted... Silence. I roared, with a voice I hadn't used in decades. The volume of my shout made everyone in the room jump. For weeks, I forced myself to remain silent while you poisoned me. For weeks, I feigned weakness while you planned my death. Now, it's my turn to speak, and you will listen to every word. I stood up and began to walk around the table where they were sitting like a predator, stalking its prey. Do you want to know what was most painful about all of this? It wasn't the arsenic Angela put in my food every day. It wasn't the sedatives George mixed in my medications. It wasn't even listening to you plan how to simulate my accident. I paused dramatically, letting the tension build. The most painful thing was realizing that your mother died believing she had raised good children. Rose left this world thinking that you would take care of me, that you would love me, that you would honor the family we built together for 45 years. George sobbed harder when he heard his mother's name. Dad, please. Your mother is dead, I continued relentlessly. But I have to live with the knowledge that you didn't feel a single genuine pang of grief at her funeral. You only calculated how much money you could get once I was dead too. Brooks, the private investigator, approached with a thick folder. Mr. Dawson, would you like us to read some of the conversations you recorded so there can be a public record of exactly what kind of people your children are? I nodded, although part of me recoiled at the idea of the whole world hearing the poisonous words of my own children. Rebecca took the recorder and pressed play. The audio quality was crystal clear, and the voices of Edward, George, and Angela filled the room with terrible clarity. This poison should have worked by now. Angela's voice sounded through the small speaker. It's been 2 weeks, and the old man is still going strong. Mom left us all these hospital debts, the funeral expenses, and he's still here spending what little is left of the inheritance. Edward's voice was heard with a coldness that made several people in the room gasp sharply. The journalist wrote furiously as the recording continued. The representatives of the original creditors took detailed notes, probably for their own legal cases. But what satisfied me most was seeing the faces of my children as they listened to their own words echoing through the room. When it came to the part where they discussed the specific details of how to kill me, George vomited, literally vomited on the floor of the notary's office, the contents of his stomach mixing with the tears he couldn't control. Edward had turned ashen gray, and Angela trembled so violently that the chair creaked under her weight. "Please turn it off," Edward pleaded with a broken voice. "We get the point." "The point," I repeated with disbelief. "Edward, the point isn't that you understand you were caught. The point is that for 6 weeks, you systematically planned my murder. And the only reason you didn't succeed was because I was smarter than you." Rebecca paused the recording and took control of the situation. "Now that we've all heard the evidence, let's proceed with the legal consequences." She opened another folder. "Edward, George, and Angela, you have 2 options. Option 1, you face criminal charges for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit homicide, and poisoning. With the evidence we have, you're looking at prison sentences of between 15 and 25 years each." Their faces turned even paler, something I hadn't thought possible. "What's the second option?" George asked with a trembling voice. "The second option," I continued, regaining control, "is that you accept the conditions I am about to impose on you. Conditions that will allow you to maintain your freedom, but under very specific terms that will guarantee you can never again harm me or any other senior citizen." Angela found her voice, though it sounded strangled. "What kind of conditions?" I smiled, and it was a smile that contained not a trace of warmth or forgiveness. "First condition, you will never approach me again. There will be no family visits, no phone calls, no communication of any kind. For all practical purposes, you have lost the right to call me father." Edward opened his mouth to protest, but I continued without giving him a chance. "Second condition, you will work to pay every cent of your real debts to the original creditors. The representatives here today will coordinate payment plans that will take you approximately 10 years to complete, assuming you work full-time without stopping." "Third condition," Rebecca interjected, "you will each donate 1,000 hours of community service, specifically caring for seniors in charity nursing homes. You will learn firsthand what it means to treat the elderly with dignity and respect." George raised his head with desperate hope in his eyes. "And if we accept all that, we really won't go to prison?" I approached him until I was directly in front of his chair. "If you accept these conditions and fulfill them faithfully for the next 10 years, the criminal charges will be suspended. But, and listen to this very clearly, if any of you violate any of these conditions, if you approach me, if you try to contact me, if you even think about harming me, all the recordings, all the evidence, and all the testimonies go directly to the police." "And Mr. Dawson," Notary Theodore added, "what about your original will?" I straightened up, feeling stronger and more alive than I had felt in years. "My original will is officially null and void. These 3 individuals have lost any right to my inheritance. When I die of natural causes, many years from now, all my money will go to charities that protect seniors from family abuse." The silence that followed was absolute and definitive. My former children looked at each other, probably communicating telepathically about their best option. But they truly had no choice, and we all knew it. Edward was the first to break. With genuine tears rolling down his cheeks, he knelt in front of my chair in a position that would have been moving if he hadn't been trying to kill me just days before. "Dad, please," he murmured, with a voice I barely recognized as my eldest son's. "I know we don't deserve forgiveness. I know what we did was unforgivable. But please, give us a chance to prove we can change." For a moment, just for a moment, my father's heart softened. Here was the child I had raised, little Edward, who used to run into my arms when I came home from work. The teenager who had told me he wanted to be like me when he grew up. But then, I remembered his cold words planning my death, and my resolve hardened like tempered steel. "Edward," I said, with a voice I carefully kept neutral, "the opportunity I'm offering is more than you gave me. For 6 weeks, you gave me no opportunity. You condemned me to death without trial, without defense, without even the courtesy of an explanation." George also knelt, his sobs now uncontrollable. "Dad, we were desperate. The debts, the pressure. We didn't know what to do. We thought that if you were no longer here, we could use the house money to fix our problems and move on with our lives." "Move on with your lives?" I repeated with disbelief. "George, you weren't planning to move on. You were planning to eliminate another person's life for your convenience. There's a fundamental difference you apparently never understood." Angela remained seated, but her former composure had completely disappeared. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "Father-in-law, I just wanted to help my husband. When Edward told me about the debts, about the pressure from the lenders, I thought it would be easier if you simply what, Angela?" I pressed her. "Finish that sentence. I want to hear you say exactly what you thought." Her voice reduced to a whisper. "I thought it would be easier if you simply left. If you died peacefully, without suffering, and we could use the inheritance to solve our problems." The journalist had stopped writing and simply watched with morbid fascination this real-time confession. The creditor's representatives frantically took notes, probably to use this information in their own legal cases. Rebecca approached with the final documents. "Very well. I need each of you to sign these legal agreements. By doing so, you are officially accepting the conditions Mr. Dawson has established, and you are relinquishing any future right to his property or inheritance." Edward looked at the papers as if they were his death sentence. "What if we don't sign?" Brooks, the private investigator, replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then I will walk out of this office and go directly to the police station with all the evidence. In an hour, you 3 will be arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. In 6 months, you will be on trial. In a year, you will be serving decades-long prison sentences." George signed first, his hands trembling so much he could barely hold the pen. Edward followed, each letter of his name seeming to cause him physical pain. Angela was the last, signing with a resignation that had completely replaced her former arrogance. "Perfect," said Rebecca, gathering the signed documents. "These agreements are now legally registered. Any violation will result in immediate criminal prosecution." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 71 years, but also a vitality I hadn't experienced in months. "Now, Banan," I said, addressing my former children, "I want you to leave. Get out of this office. Get out of my life. And begin the long journey toward becoming people your mother would have recognized." Edward made one last desperate attempt. "Dad, is there any way, any chance, that you could ever forgive us?" The question hit me with an unexpected force. For a moment, I saw not the adults who had conspired to kill me, but the children I had raised, the babies I had comforted during fevers, the little ones who had run to me shouting, "Dad!" when I came home. "Edward," I said finally, "forgiveness is not something that can be asked for. It is something that is earned through years of consistent actions, of genuine change, of demonstrating that you have truly understood the magnitude of what you did. I paused, choosing my words carefully. In 10 years, if you have faithfully fulfilled all the conditions, if you have genuinely helped other seniors, if you have shown that you have fundamentally changed who you are as people, then perhaps we can talk. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't an absolute denial either. It was the closest to forgiveness I could get at that moment. And from the expression on their faces, they understood it was more than they deserved. George stood up, swaying, wiping tears with the back of his hand. Dad, I want you to know that I truly loved Mom, and that at some point, when we were children, I truly loved you too. His words broke my heart in a way I hadn't anticipated. I know, George, I replied softly. That's why it hurts so much, because I remember the children who used to love me, and those children would have been horrified by what the adults became. Angela approached hesitantly, as if unsure whether she had the right to speak. Father-in-law, I wanted to tell you that I respected Rose. She was a good woman, a gentle woman, and I am ashamed to have dishonored her memory with what I did. It was the first genuinely human thing I had heard her say, and I nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Rose was fond of you, Angela. She thought you were good for Edward. If she could see you now... I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. One by one, my former children left the notary's office. Edward stopped at the door, turning back to look at me one last time. Dad, he said with a broken voice, I'm going to try to become the man you and Mom thought I was when I was a child. I hope so, Edward, I replied. I truly hope so. When the door closed behind them, I was left alone with Rebecca, the notary, the investigator, and the journalist. For the first time in 6 weeks, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt like peace. How do you feel, Mr. Dawson? The journalist asked, clearly preparing for the end of his article. I sat down again, feeling as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I feel, I said slowly, as if I had finally awakened from a very long nightmare, and as if for the first time in months, I could look towards the future instead of just trying to survive the present. Rebecca approached and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. What will you do now, Mr. Dawson? I looked out the window towards the street, where I could see my former children walking slowly towards their car, their heads bowed, their lives completely changed forever. Now, I said, with a smile that was completely genuine, I am going to live. 6 months after that transformative Friday, at the notary's office, my life had changed in ways I never would have imagined possible. I moved out of the house where I had raised my children, not because I was forced to, but because every room was filled with memories that now had a bitter taste. I bought a smaller but bright house on the other side of town, with large windows that let in the morning sun, and a garden where I could plant new roses in honor of Rose. But the most significant change wasn't physical. It was emotional. For the first time in decades, I woke up every morning without fear. No fear of being poisoned, no fear of being pushed down the stairs, no fear of my own children planning my death while I slept. It was a freedom I had forgotten existed. Rebecca had become more than my lawyer. She had become a genuine friend. We lunched together every Friday, and she kept me informed about my former children's progress. Edward had gotten a job at a factory, an honest job that paid little but allowed him to make regular payments to his creditors. George had completely stopped drinking and was working double shifts at a warehouse, dedicating every extra dollar to paying off his debts. And Angela? I asked during one of our weekly lunches. Rebecca smiled in a way I had learned to recognize as bearing good news. Angela has been surprising, Mr. Dawson. She's working at a nursing home, not just fulfilling her community service hours, but she requested extra hours. The administrator tells me the residents adore her, that she has a genuine patience and gentleness with them. This news filled me with complex emotion. Part of me was glad that she could find genuine redemption. Another part wondered if that gentleness with other seniors was real, or just another act. Do you think the change is genuine? I think, Rebecca said after carefully considering her answer, that sometimes people need to hit rock bottom completely before they can find their real humanity. What you did not only saved them from prison, it forced them to confront exactly who they had become. The journalist had published his article 3 weeks after the events at the notary's office. The headline read, "Elderly Man uncovers children's murder plot, uses secret inheritance for poetic revenge." The story went viral, generating thousands of comments and shares. But what impacted me most were the letters I began to receive. Hundreds of letters from seniors who had experienced neglect or abuse from their families. Elders who felt like burdens, who had been financially manipulated, who had lost hope. Each letter broke my heart. But it also gave me a purpose I hadn't had since Rose's death. With Rebecca's help, I established a foundation called Dawson's Dignity, dedicated to protecting seniors from family and financial abuse. I used half of my inheritance to fund it, creating a fund that would provide free legal assistance, private investigation, and temporary shelter for seniors in dangerous situations. Mr. Dawson, Rebecca told me the day we signed the foundation papers, your Uncle Arthur would be very proud. This is exactly the kind of justice he would have supported. The irony was not lost on me. The money my children had coveted so much, the money for which they had been willing to kill me, was now being used to protect other people from exactly the kind of abuse they had perpetrated against me. 6 months after the incident, I received the first letter from Edward. My first reaction was not to open it. Part of the agreement was that they were not to contact me. But when I called Rebecca, she explained that written but unsent letters were part of their mandatory therapy, and that the therapist had decided this particular letter should be delivered. The letter was short, handwritten, with a script I recognized as my son's, but more shaky than I remembered. Dad, I know I have no right to call you that after what I did. I know this letter probably violates the spirit of our agreement, although the doctor says it's legally permitted. I don't expect a reply. I just needed you to know that every day I work at the nursing home, I see your face in every elderly person I care for. I see the fear in their eyes when their families don't come to visit them. And I understand the fear you must have felt when you discovered our plan. There are no words for the shame I feel. Mom taught me to value family above everything else, and I turned family into something monstrous. If I could change what I did, I would give anything. But I can't. I can only try to live in a way that honors the memory of the person you thought I was when I was a child. Edward, I read that letter 5 times before putting it away in my desk. I didn't reply because I wasn't ready, but I didn't throw it away either. It was evidence that maybe, just maybe, something of the child I had raised still existed within the man who had conspired to kill me. George also wrote to me 2 weeks later. His letter was different, more direct. Dad, I'm not going to ask for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm not going to explain my actions because they have no explanation. I just want you to know that I've been sober for 6 months, that I work 16 hours a day to pay my debts, and that every night before I sleep, I ask Mom to forgive me for dishonoring everything she taught us. I've met other men in therapy who have abused their elderly parents, and now I understand that we are a silent epidemic. I'm working with a counselor to understand how I became the kind of person capable of poisoning his own father. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope you know that the money was never worth what we lost. George. That letter made me cry. Not tears of self-pity, but tears for the children I had lost, and for the possibility, however remote, that perhaps they could find their way back to humanity. Angela never wrote to me directly, but Rebecca informed me that she had specifically asked to work with Alzheimer's patients in the nursing home, the most vulnerable and difficult to care for. She says she wants to truly understand what it means to care for someone without expecting anything in return, Rebecca reported to me. 1 year after the incident, on the anniversary of Rose's death, I did something I hadn't planned. I went to the cemetery, not just to visit my wife's grave, but also to talk to her about everything that had happened. Rose, I said to her marble headstone, our children tried to kill me, but I think that maybe there's still hope for them. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them completely, but I see signs that they might be finding their way back to the people you thought they were. The wind whispered through the cemetery trees, and for a moment I could have sworn I felt Rose's presence, not judging, but simply accompanying me in my pain and my hope. 2 years later, Edward formally requested a meeting. Through Rebecca, he asked permission to come see me, not to ask for forgiveness, but to show me something. After much consideration, I accepted. When he arrived at my new house, I barely recognized him. He had lost weight, had new wrinkles, but there was also something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Genuine humility. He brought a folder full of letters from the residents of the nursing home where he worked, testifying about his gentle and dedicated care. Dad, he said, sitting carefully on the edge of the chair, as if he didn't feel worthy of being comfortable. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came to show you that the child you raised still exists somewhere deep down, and I wanted to thank you for not completely killing him when you had every reason to do so. We talked for 2 hours, not about forgiveness, not about reconciliation, but about who we were now, what we had learned, how pain can transform people in completely opposite directions. When he left, we didn't hug, we didn't declare restored paternal love, but for the first time in years, I could see my son in the man walking away from my door. Today, at 74 years old, I wake up every morning in a house full of light, surrounded by letters from seniors who have found hope through my foundation. My former children continue to fulfill their agreements, working honestly, caring for other seniors, slowly building lives that might one day be worthy of the woman who raised them. I don't know if I will ever completely forgive them. I don't know if we will ever be a family again. But I know this. The revenge I took was not destructive. It was reconstructive. I gave them the opportunity to discover who they could be if they left behind who they had become. And in the process, I discovered that I too could be transformed. Not into a victim, not into an avenger, but into something more powerful. A survivor who used his pain to protect others. Rose would have been proud, and for the first time since her death, that is enough for me. If you enjoyed my story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can write more stories like this. Thanks a lot in advance. What about you? What would you do in this person's shoes? I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. I'm always curious to know what you think. Oh, and let me know where you've heard this story. If you want to hear more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many more waiting for you. Big hugs, and see you next time.